During the period of the Cold War in Africa, the West was more concerned with the battle against communism. So that if you said in Africa that you are an ally of the West in the war against communism, the West did not care what kind of regime you are running in your own country. This gave opportunity to dictatorship to thrive on the African continent. This is how we created big dictatorships like Mobutu Sese Seko of Zaire. Idi Amin of Uganda could slaughter people in Uganda but still be elected as chairman of African Organization of African Union. Jean Bedel Bokassa's, the Kamuzu Bandas of Africa. But all this has now changed. We have demonstrated that development cannot come to the African continent without democracy, that good governance, democracy are interlinked with development, that Africa's underdevelopment has to do with how Africa has been governed for 50 years since independence. And that's the reason here why the new leadership that is now emerging in the African continent is demanding that it is necessary for the international community to give support and backing to forces that are fighting for democratization on the African continent. There is a direct link between poverty and politics, that politics and economy are intertwined, as was said earlier on here, linked at the waist. Therefore, we, and I want now come to Kenya specifically, have been going through a transition. We held an election last year. These elections were hotly contested, but the results were disputed. As a result of the misconduct of the Electoral Commission, which was not independent, Kenyans protested at the rigging that is so. Many people died in our country. Over 1,500 people were killed. 350,000 people were displaced in the country. And it took the intervention of the African Union, the United Nations, and the European Union to get the parties to a negotiating table. We did negotiate a transition in which we agreed on a power-sharing arrangement between the two main parties. Whereas we have one party holding the presidency, we have the other party holding the premiership, and the cabinet is shared equally. But we want to say that the Kenyan solution cannot be used as a model for democracy in Africa. This is basically a stopgap measure for countries that are emerging from dictatorship to democracy. Zimbabwe also has had disputed elections. In the Zimbabwean case, we had a case where there was a winner and a loser. The loser refused to accept defeat and therefore proceeded to hold a second round of elections in which they declared themselves the winners. There have been negotiations, and a compromise is about to be reached more along the models of Kenya. But I want to say that the Kenyan model cannot be really used as a model for the whole of Africa or the rest of the world. Because in doing so, we will be denying forces of democracy their rights. But it is sometimes necessary to make some kind of compromises for the greater good of society. I want to conclude my remarks by saying that Africa is come of age. New leadership in Africa is coming, which is saying that aid dependency has perpetuated poverty on the African continent. That what Africa wants is more trade and investments. And that as the African countries create the necessary conditions for investment, it's appeal for the international community to give support to this new paradigm shift in African politics. That we need that Africa, the richest continent in terms of resources, must not continue to remain the poorest. That it is possible to propel Africa from the stage of poverty to prosperity by the African people, but with the strong support of the international community. Thank you.